Warhammer 40,000 Renegades, Lord of Excess by Rich McCormick. Chapter 6. The first boom shook dust from the ancient stone ceiling above. Arcat brushed it away from the page, irritated by the thought he might be caned again for an interruption that wasn't his fault. Even the second boom, louder, closer, and powerful enough to send the golden candelabra skittering off the altar of the Emperor, didn't dissuade him from his studies. It was only with the third boom, the one that shattered the 20-foot-tall glycaic image of an angel in purple descending from a golden sky, that Arcat looked up. He decided to risk breaking the imposed silence on the Midstorum adepts, and turned to the young man sitting next to him. "Hey, Roke, what do you think is going on?" he asked. Roke met him with a bemused expression, for a fourth boom forestalled any chance of a reply. This one came with the sound of splintering, as Arcat turned, and saw the cathedral door blow inwards, the ancient wood splintering open like a monster's mouth to reveal jagged teeth. Another explosion, the door became so many splinters, filling the air inside the entranceway with missiles. The midday sun shone through the doorway, illuminating smoke in the air, and framing the silhouettes of dozens of men and women as they streamed through the hole they had created. They were shouting guttural challenges and cries of rage that Arcat could barely recognize as low Gothic. They were all filthy, and brandished rusted weapons that they brought to their shoulders, before firing indiscriminately at his direction. Bullets tore through stacked holy texts and pinged off intricately carved columns, sending puffs of marble dust into the air with each shot. More windows shattered, the shards of coloured glass cascading to the ground like flowing water. Arcat threw himself under his pew, immediately incensed at the destruction. Who were these low-born heretics to force their way into this most sacred of places, to desecrate the Emperor's image, and spit in the face of the planet that had birthed him? How dare they? Not for the first time today, he wished his brother was here. Tilo would have put these traitors down without a second thought. He felt a tingle of excitement as he imagined it. A carbine levelled at soft bodies, its bullets tearing through skin and muscle until there was nothing left but chunks of ragged meat. And Arcat, the hero. But Tilo wasn't here, and Arcat had no weapons. Just a children's storybook and a quill. He looked to the old priest, Father Tumas, for direction, but he saw not anger in his milky eyes, but fear. Tears ran down his wrinkled face, and he raised his hands into the air. Arcat hated him more than ever before in that moment. "Do something," he whispered under his breath, as the old priest whimpered in surrender. Arcat wasn't waiting any longer. He slid from his seat, reaching forward to tuck his copybook under his arm as he moved to a ducking run. Keeping low behind the pews, out of sight of the people streaming through the door, other youths sat and watched, dumbfounded. They were close to their 20th year, all of them, but their sheltered lives and oversized cassocks made them look impossibly young. Arcat hissed at them, trying to get their attention, beckoning them to follow. They too slipped out of their pews, joining him in a procession away from their attackers, towards the back of the cathedral. They'd been taken by surprise, but he knew this church, knew its secret corners and passages. He led the boys past the nave and the altar, pushing gently on the tapestry of St. Desaid to reveal a short tunnel that led precipitously down into the cathedral's undercroft. He lifted the heavy tapestry with one arm and beckoned the other boys through, half guiding, half pushing them down the short slope to reach the comparative safety below. Once he was sure he had rounded up all of his compatriots, he skidded down to the worn stone after them. Gunshots were quieter down here, filtered through layers of ancient rock, but they still weren't safe. The crypt, with its heavy adamantine doors, was his aim. Serene's grand cathedral was the patronage of many of the planet's noble families, and though he rarely saw any of their number at worship, They competed to outdo each other with elaborate gifts bestowed upon the ecclesiarchy. Some took pride of place in the cathedral itself, but there was only so much room, and as the fortunes of the planet's families waxed and waned, more and more of these gifts ended up in the Undercroft. Their luster dimmed by years in the dark, Arcat leather boys passed the marvel statues of winged figures, golden lecterns in the shape of imperial eagles, and more representations of Serene's four-armed saviour of legend than he could find the energy to count. Finally, they reached the imposing double doors that marked the entrance to the crypt. Ignoring their complaints, Arcat ushered the youths through the door, shoving the more hesitant of their number into the gloom. "Is this the only way?" one boy asked, his face pained. "Won't they find us down here?" "It's better than up there," Arcat said, brooking no argument as he pushed the boy past the threshold and into the crypt. A face reappeared out of the darkness. "What do we do, Arcat?" Volay asked. He was the youngest of the boys, and inordinately proud of the wispy mustache he had grown over the last winter. It was full of wet snot now, and Volay sniffed deep before wiping away the remnants on the sleeve of his cassock. "Stay here and stay quiet," Arcat replied, putting a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "Lock the door, and only open it if the Emperor himself comes knocking." "Where are you going?" "I'm going back up there to show these base-born scum what happens to people who attack the Emperor's chosen." His route back to the cathedral's nave took him past treasures, and he paused in front of one idol, rendered in polished black stone. The figure was the one from his picture book, a four-armed figure, clutching two bowls and two blades. The blades were ceremonial, but looked wickedly sharp, glinting even in the dim light of the Undercroft. Arcat gave the closest blade a testing tug, and he was pleased to see that it was held in a loose grip. He tested the weight of the sword in his hand and realized he would need two hands to hold it, let alone swing it. Still, it was a weapon, and he trusted his righteous fury to guide it true. "Sorry," Arcat said to the mythical founder of his world. "I think I need this more than you." Hefting the sword over his shoulder, he turned back to the idol. "I'll bring it straight back, I promise." The curtain material was soft on her skin. Cecily ran her hand down it, hoping to find an opening, but found it springy and firm, like the grass she had pushed through before she arrived here. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it must have only been a few hours. He found a seam and shouldered through, stepping out of the open door and onto the balcony that overlooked the city. She saw it arrayed in front of her for the first time, from the street level. Serene's Overcity had been beautiful from up here. It was stunning. She saw mansions of glass and pillars of marble, towers of silver and gold, and between them all, forests and statues, their shapes human and beast, and all stages in between. She took it all in, all the exotic beauty, so utterly alien to her, until her eyes landed on something familiar. A church. It happened as if dredged up from her memory. It was far more grandiose than any of the sheet metal chapels and pipework shrines she had come to know in the Undercity. But the trappings of faith, the huge golden aquila high on the wall, the depictions of the Emperor in glassaic windows 2 stories high, and the vast statue of Serene's founding angel set into a niche on the building's south-facing side, gave away its purpose. There were taller buildings clustered around it, spires and towers encrusted with ornate decorations and the ubiquitous statues, but even they seemed to bow in deference to the church. The path clear for all nearby to see this masterpiece and appreciate its beauty. A vast pipe rose from its centre, used to carry Solipsa sap from the surface to this city above the clouds. Long and dark, it resembled the proboscis of some vast insect, sucking the lifeblood of the city below to feed the city above. The church's double doors were made of dark wood and inlaid with metal that, from her vantage point of the balcony, reflected the sunlight back into her eyes. She winced and cast her gaze down across the marble stairs that led up from the street level. They were decorated with bodies. There were dozens, maybe hundreds dead, killed as they fled or fought, figures draped over steps in their resting places as if they were lounging in the bright sun. Their perfect stillness and the pools of red that stained the white marble below, the only indications as to the truth of the matter. Thrown, Cecily gasped, taking in the scale of the massacre. Why did they do this? A human shape lay on the balcony itself, white in the midday sun. "Hello?" she called, hoping the figure would stir, but it remained unnervingly still. Summoning her tattered bravery, she crept towards the body until it revealed its true form. A statue, toppled from one of the many platforms and plinths that decorated the overcity. Below, too, statues lay alongside the flesh and blood humans that they depicted. Their perfect faces serene, their complexions so pure and so white in a midday sun that they appeared to be the negative form of the people that died around them. A perverse imitation of death by an object that played at life. To see such death and destruction pained her spirit. Wetness welled in the corner of her eyes as she scanned them across dead men and women in brightly coloured robes, their mouths open to take in the horror of their last moments. No, it pained more than just her spirit. There was a physical pain in her head too, a gnawing, buzzing sensation, as though her skull was being constricted in one of the refinery's pulping machines. "No," she groaned, pushing the heels of her hands into her eyes for a moment of respite, and gasped as they came away dotted with bright spots of blood. "Get out of my head!" The stillness was broken by movement as figures appeared from the side street. They moved like a swarm of insects, circling and falling back together as they headed towards the steps. She steadied herself, her head still swimming, and peeked over the edge. Outriders on the edge of the group moved quickly between the corpses, some picking up objects she couldn't see, others firing bullets into fallen men and women to ensure that they were truly dead. The next rank scanned the rooftops and walkways of the marble city for targets, training autoguns and las weaponry upwards, even as they moved. She pressed herself closer to the low wall as they turned in her direction, her vantage point giving her unique oversight of the group. At their centre, held up on a palanquin, carried by hulking figures, was the beautiful woman. Her robe had been cast off, revealing a pale pink jumpsuit, similar to those worn by those she commanded. Even with such mundane clothing, she was luminous in the sunlight. A dazzling figure whose edges seemed to fray and warp as Cecily watched her guide her troops. Behind her, carried between metal poles by similarly huge figures, was a container, its contents hidden from view, but clearly both massive and revered by the throng. The buzzing in her head became a roar as her eyes passed back and forth between the woman and the container, the pain pressing against her head like a vice. She thought that she could hear words in the maelstrom, like someone whispering over the sound of a threshing machine's engine, but she couldn't work out their meaning. She wanted to stand, to reveal herself, to wave her arms and apologize for her weakness. Anything as long as she could join the leader and her collective. Cecily would kill for her. She would die for her. She would do whatever this luminous figure deemed necessary, for as long as she wanted. The sound in her head blocked out any other thoughts. She started to rise from her hiding place, arms raised. No, no. She pulled her right arm down with her left, and they started to rise in unison, plunging them both into her worksuit's ample pockets. She felt a small object. Grateful of a physical distraction to the mental barrage, pulled it out. It was a bundle of dried grass, shaped roughly into human form, albeit with 4 arms instead of 2. She knew it immediately. Of course she knew it. She had carried it with her for the last 6 years. Her ever-present companion for every shift cycle, every bunk rotation. It was her own saviour. Grandpa had woven it for her 13th birthday, the same day she had been drafted into the refinery labour detail. "He'll protect you," Grandpa had said. When she'd asked what specifically the object would protect her from, with the cynicism of a child on the cusp of adulthood, He'd simply close her hand around the icon. Anything you need him to, he had told her, and left it at that. She looked up at the church, at the figure of her saviour. It looked nothing like her own icon. Hers was woven from dried grass, banded together with cast-off bundle wire. It had none of the beautiful features depicted on the church. No thin nose, no pursed lips, no wide-set eyes. It had no face at all, but it was unmistakably the same figure, and it connected her from this unfamiliar place to her own past. She could feel the blood on her cheeks now, her vision reddening as the pressure of her head built. She held the icon in 2 hands and pulled it into her body, making herself a home for her protector, just as the church was a home for its own icon. She saw its 4 walls, strong and high, and built them in her mind. She put her protector front and centre, and studded it with more of her own icons, of her grandpa and her brave cousin, of the grass and the solipsis sap of the Emperor himself. The maelstrom swelled still. The voices, indistinct before, were growing louder, speaking words of command and control. They pressed against the walls she had built in her mind, and when they couldn't break them outright, felt around instead, searching for a weak point in the foundations that they could slip through. But she had built these walls with her own faith, and she knew their strength. "Throne, protect me," she whispered as the pressure built, until she thought her head would burst. And then it was gone. She risked another glance over the wall. The woman was gone, so too was her cargo. The last stragglers from her group disappearing through the church doors, doors that appeared to have been blasted open. "Thank you," she whispered to the 4-armed figure. Beyond it, in the blue sky, she saw moving light, like a star falling from the heavens. The bridge of the exhortation rang with a cacophony of sound. Sirens blared, klaxons wailed, bridge crew and servitors screamed in mindless panic as the frigate rocketed against and under explosive force. Thick curtains swayed as Xantine pushed through them, taking up position in his command throne. "Damage report," he demanded as he settled into the golden seat. "We have taken a massive hit to the exhortation's core ganglion cluster," Radaron responded, turning smartly to address her Space Marine warlord from her position in the crew pit. "The decks are impassable, so we can't assess the damage ourselves. Reports from the navigator are incoherent." Gellia's droning voice was just one sound amid the orchestra of chaos. Xantine focused on her robotic tones as the ship-spanning entity called out a garbled status report. "Lower decks breached. Venting fluids. Engine decks breached. Reactor misfiring." The navigator's voice was halting, staccato, hitched as if with a laboured breath that it didn't have. I can't feel my... And then, with an audible gasp, the void sinks into my blood. Pain hung thick in the air, so dense that Xantine could taste it. The mound of flesh convulsed, writhing as if in agony. Radaron stared at him, gauging his reaction. "What was that?" Xantine asked. There was a short delay before Radaron responded. "I don't know, my lord," she said. "Ship had been returning garbled responses to my status requests. It seems to be confused." Gallia continued her grim report, voice once more robotic in tone. "Weapon systems inactive. Require immediate maintenance. Void shields inoperable. Void shields cold. The void is cold." There was a sucking sound, like a gunshot man catching his last breath. And then the voice came back. It was softer now, still loud enough to be heard across the bridge of the exhortation. But the harsh mechanical tone had softened, and it was now wavering in pitch and timbre. It sounded almost human. "Hello?" the ship whimpered. "Are you there? I'm so cold." There was panic in the voice now, audible enough through the distortion. Alarms swelled with each word, the suffering building until the ship was screaming in agony, howling its final coda, "Help me!" The alarms reached a crescendo, klaxons and horns and sirens, the full complement of sounds on a ship that had never known silence, all firing at once. They harmonized to build a single screaming tone that burst the eardrums of human bridge crew, unlucky or unwise enough not to plug their ears. Men and women banged their skulls against the cogitator consoles, driven insensate by the violence of the sound, as blood and lymph fluid ran from their heads. And then the sound stopped. There was silence. Absolute silence. For the first time on the bridge of the exhortation since the ship entered the service of the Emperor's children. Report, Xantine hissed. Something in his subconscious suggested that he keep his voice low. Reverence, perhaps. I don't know, my lord, Raedron said. She steadied herself against Gallia's central support dais. Shaky from the sonic ordeal, members of her crew moaned in pain. The sound almost comically quiet in the wake of such noise. Core cogitators are down. Servitor was not responding. And the navigator is... The round of flesh didn't even recoil from the touch, and Raedron tailed off. I'm sorry, my lord. I know nothing more than you. I demand answers, Xantine screamed, drawing a mule of panic from Raedron. She caught a breath, but any response was swallowed up by the sound of a new voice over the bridge vox channel, sibilant and dry. She is dead, Curran Toon said, matter-of-factly. Xantine let out an involuntary growl. You lie, word-bearer, he said, disbelief and anger swelling together. I tell the truth, Toon said. The word-bearer had no particular malice towards Gallia, but observing her passing had been of particularly scholarly interest to the collector. Xantine could hear the smile on his tattooed lip. She was quite the soul, you know. She had grown into a creature like no other, and her passing left a rent in the warp. You should see the Neverborn, Xantine. They arrive and cavort as we speak. I have weeks of cataloguing ahead of me. You disgust me, Xantine said. Dearly wished he could strike the word-bearer through the vox. Gallia is the exhortation. My ship. She cannot simply die. She would not do this to me. My lord, if I may, Raedron cut in. I can only imagine the depths of sensation you must be feeling at this moment. But if what Lord Toon says is true, then we have no navigator. Without our navigator, we cannot leave the system. The thing... Gallia, Xantine corrected. Gallia, Raedron said, swallowing the word like rancid meat, before trying again. Gallia was so embedded in the exhortation systems that the warp drive, and the ship itself, will not be functional without her. What do you propose? Xantine asked. I do not know, my lord. Toon spoke, his voice still, even despite the dire predicament the adored were in. There may be a way, he whispered, with a voice like shifting sands. Just as Gallia's body entwined with the ship, his soul grew closer to the warp. Should we find someone with specific psychic compatibilities, our chirurgians may be able to intervene, connecting the ship's organic systems with the mind of a blind psyker. But where would such an individual be found? Raedron said. We have a planet at our disposal, Xantine said. I'm sure we can procure something, someone, to meet our needs. I have to say, I'm really enjoying this book. Sorry, it's been a little while since the last chapter. I've just kind of been busy. I've just been really busy with life and stuff. Streaming, work, LARPing. But yeah, I didn't expect Gallia to die. That kind of came at me out of nowhere. I'm very glad that we're getting to see more of the Ministorum guys, because I thought that they'd play a potentially big part in this story. The next chapter is going to be out much sooner. I'm going to try and get a couple of these out every single week to try and catch out, because I've got a lot of other books I want to get through, honestly. I know that there are quite a few chapters left in this book. Yeah, there's at least another 20 chapters in this book left. But by the end of September, the whole collection should be out. I have a bad feeling about what's going to happen to Cecily. I don't want her to be fused to the ship and become a navigator. I feel like that's exactly what's going to happen, though. Or maybe they'll find someone else. I hope they find someone else. Cecily's too likable. She's too likable. But good things never happen. Bad things always happen to good people in Warhammer. I feel like there hasn't been much time since the end of Chapter 5 and the end of Chapter 6, in all honesty. It feels like they've not even moved from that previous scene. But I suppose we're just trying to explore all of these things are happening simultaneously. But yeah, I hope that you're enjoying the reading, and we'll stick with it, and come see our next one.